Well, good morning or good afternoon or good evening, depending on where you're joining us in the world. Welcome to Open Classroom. This is a very special program offered in partnership with Washington University's Africa Initiative. I'm Janet Gillow, the Director of Professional Development for the Brown School here at Washington University in St. Louis. Really happy to welcome you to today's program. For folks joining on Zoom, we really want to encourage you to use the chat function. We've already been checking in to find out where in the world we're reaching you. But as the presentation goes, there's going to be opportunities for your comments and questions. So please do feel free to jump in at any point, and we will make note of your thoughts. Want to extend a special welcome to anybody joining on YouTube, either the live stream now or perhaps catching our recording later. You're welcome, and I want to make you aware we are not able to moderate Q&A for YouTube. So before we get started today, I just want to let you know what we have coming up yet this week. It's a busy week for Open Classroom. Tomorrow, we have a program on understanding and improving St. Louis's not-for-profit sector. We're going to be joined by the Community Innovation and Action Center at University of Missouri St. Louis to discuss their recent regional indicators report. And then on Thursday, that's December 9th, we have a program, What Do People Mean When They Say AI, ML, Big Data, or Data Science? Dr. Liberty Vittert of Olin Business School here at WashU is delivering a program, and that's part of our Artificial Intelligence in the Social Sciences series. We'd love to have you come back. We've already got many things open for registration for the spring. Truly something for everyone, and everyone welcome. But now to start today's program, I'm pleased to pass the microphone over to Kurt Dirks, our Vice Chancellor for International Affairs and the Bank of America Professor of Leadership. Take us away, Kurt.
Well, Janet, thank you, and thank you for always doing a great job of managing the difficult situation we have with audio. Even I dropped off for a minute there here in St. Louis. So, welcome. Good day to everyone, no matter where you're from. It looks like we have a very wide-ranging audience today. My name is Kurt Dirks, and I'm the Vice Chancellor for International Affairs here at Washington University in St. Louis. This is, as Janet mentioned, part of our focus on Africa at Washington University. We have a very large number of faculty who are doing work all across the continent, and those faculty, at least here on campus, come from all different disciplines, doing a wide variety of work on the continent. Last year, we had kicked off the Africa Speak series by having WashU faculty share some of their work in Africa. And this year, for those of you who have joined us before, you know that we are doing something different in that we are having friends, collaborators from Africa share their work to help build that collaboration. And today's session with Lombe is one of those that we are having. We have a host, a WashU host often for these, and today's host is my colleague Heather Cameron. Heather does work in social innovation entrepreneurship and plays a very important role in the classroom, teaching students, helping students outside the classroom with advising on projects and careers, and doing research. Her research is on comparative urban education development and social impact strategies. She is the Michael Kaufman Professor of Practice and Social Entrepreneurship, and she is very global in her own work, working all across the world in Europe and Africa and Asia, and we are delighted that she is hosting today. Heather, thank you for doing today.
Yes, well, thank you very much, Kurt, and thank you, Janet, for the opportunity to introduce the awesome work of my friend and colleague, Dr. Lombe Mwambwa. We are together, people are very passionate about the power of sport to make a change in society and to contribute to the Sustainable Development Goals. We're going to have a great opportunity to see exactly how sports and physical activity can do that. Dr. Lombe got her PhD this year at the University of Chester on a topic, the experience of women leaders in the African spirit of women leaders in the African Union Sports Council. Lombe herself is a sports leader leading the National Organization for Women in Sport, Physical Activity and Recreation in Lusaka, Zambia, as well an organization which is dedicated to expanding the sports sector and what it can be seen to do. So beyond just play and fun and recreation and leisure, but the important contributions of sport to education, to health, to especially maternal and infant health, and the different ways that sports contributes to building the sort of communities that we want to live in. Importantly, it's not just about running an organization, but building a movement and helping other neighboring countries in Southern Africa build up their infrastructure to develop the sports sector. She is a recipient of the Anita White Foundation, an active foundation in the area of growing the role of sports for development and thinking about important gender questions. Interestingly, being here at the university, Lombe didn't join sport as a football player, but as an undergraduate had the opportunity to hear about how sports workshops and tournaments can be useful in the fight against HIV/AIDS. And so as a young undergraduate, got talked into joining and organizing a football tournament and hasn't looked back since. There's also a wonderful connection to the Brown School at Washington University with her uncle, Bani Lombe, earning an MSW in the 70s from the Brown School, which he's been putting to work developing sports and community development projects for people working in the Copper Belt in Zambia. So welcome very much, Lombe, to our talk today. I've had my pronunciation corrected. It's Chichester, not Chester, not the University of Chester. Okay, Lombe, please.
So it looks like she had some internet connectivity, and we're gonna have to pause and see if we can bring her back.
In the meantime,
yeah,
let me say something about how I know Lombe, because I have my formal academic introduction that I'm supposed to offer. But Lombe is a force of nature. After having earned a degree also in looking at media and then in women in law, trying to find many different ways, many different tools just to basically build out the movement around sports for development. Understanding that often people are looking down on what sports for development can offer because it's seen as like just volunteer coaches, but there's so many different skill sets that are part of it. Psychosocial, children development experts, gender experts, people thinking about health. And so part of the reason she was saying to me was to do her PhD was just to get the credentials necessary in order to operate at the kind of top levels of government and foundations to build this movement to improve the quality of life, for people, both through, all the different things that we can get from sport. Lombe, have we got you?
Yes, thank you so much. Happy to be here.
So if you'd like to
say hi to everyone briefly.
Yeah, so we'll play it safe with your video muted to start, but maybe you had some images you wanted to walk us through.
Yes, I had some images I wanted to share because I wanted to give us a bit of a reminder about the sport element of sport for development, because we've sort of been locked in the last almost 2 years with the pandemic and theoretical and conceptual, and we forget the very tangible aspect around sport, about movement, about joy, and about being outside in many cases. So some of the images I wanted to share are just young people in different situations playing sport. So when the internet gets a little bit better, I shall show those images. So thank you so much for this opportunity to to be in the space with everyone from around the world, and with you, especially Heather. We've been in many spaces together in many parts of the world, and over the last couple of years, it's mostly been online, but we take what we can. So the first thing I wanted to mention is that we do not take for granted that currently we are still in the context of the COVID-19 pandemic, and this has meant a major crisis for all of us in terms of our personal engagement with sport, as well as organizations that organize or arrange sport, and that use these organizations as a way to interact in our various communities and societies. So with that in mind, I think we have this conversation today as sort of a way to reflect also on getting back to some of the basic ideas when we say basics, and to then reflect on whether even currently we are still engaging with some of those concepts and some of those issues that brought us to sport for development. So to begin with, if we can start with the understanding that development for us, and as we are gathered here, is really about freedoms. It's about freedom from the things that would hold us back. So it's freedom from what holds us back from having everything we need, whether it's food or shelter or good health. So it's those, it's that liberty to not experience lack, to not experience poverty. And the philosopher and economist Amartya Sen puts this across when he says development is really about freedom. Secondly, this is articulated when we look at the Sustainable Development Goals, which we might be more familiar with, and outlined in those 17 particular themes. And these themes, whether it is the idea that we should have no poverty, or we should have no hunger, or we should have good health, all of these are in essence speaking to the idea that we should be free of poverty, we should be free of hunger, and we should be free of all of those things that get in the way of us having access to a life that we can live that is fulfilling to the best possible measure. And so today I wanted us to still keep that in mind when we consider what sport for development is about then. And that sport for development becomes about the work that we do relating to the social outcomes. And those outcomes could be, as Heather also pointed out, about maternal health or mental health or sexual health. Yeah, and so I will have you know that after the Millennium Development Goals, the focus on sustainable development goals does have something that relates to the internet and to technology. And hopefully when it gets fulfilled, we will not be having these sorts of breaks in transmission when we seek to engage like we are doing now. But all of this to remind us that this is the bigger picture of what we're trying to achieve for the whole world, what governments across the world, what NGOs are about people's well-being are mobilizing to achieve a reality where we can have freedom from want, freedom from poverty, freedom from hunger, as stated before. So I'd like to move us along to some examples. If we move to slide 10, Janet, that would be great. I'd like to move us along to some examples of some organizations and the projects and work that they're doing across different countries in Africa, just to remind us tangibly what's translating those sustainable development goals, which are set and agreed through governments, what that looking there, not state organizations.
Lombe?
They are mobilized by individuals and volunteers and groups. And then they get to do the work that contributes to a change of what this work looks like. It's labeled some.
Hi, everybody. I'm sorry we seem to be having such difficulty with the connection. I think what we should suggest is, Lombe, maybe if you can find a way to call in, just do straight audio into Zoom with your cell phone. There's different access numbers you can look up, because we just see some of the audience are saying they're not able to understand, and it's unfortunately quite distorted. But I can maybe, if I take the step of explaining some of these things, which you and I have both worked together on in terms of connecting sports to development, maybe you and Janet can in the background chat a little bit about how you could access through your phone, because unfortunately the internet is not our friend today in terms of providing decent sound. And so I will go over some of the themes here in your presentation just to help people understand sports for development, and then have you join us for the questions and answers with me and then with all of the other participants today. Okay, so I think most of us are familiar with the idea that from the Millennium Development Goals, there is an even greater commitment from the International Committee of the community to the Sustainable Development Goals. And we're working on many of these points together, a focus perhaps on Sustainable Development Goal 5 around gender equality, but also that's very clearly linked to quality education and to good health. And in the developing world, even more of these angles around economic development, around having young women have access to good jobs, having people having access to equitable economic development are all points which can be developed through sports for development. And then when we think about, and then just guys, just send me something in the chat when Lombe, you're ready to take over. And then the point about sports for development, it's quite different than what we would normally think about as sort of elite sports or large sports organizations. While some of these large professional sports organizations are part of the sports for development community, the point is to have they have the overarching aim of achieving cultural, physical, economic, and health related outcomes. So it's not to be an Olympic champion. It's to instead be a champion for your community and to help develop your community further. And as Lombe has quoted here, less a focus on winning, more an attention towards inclusion and contribution towards a healthy civic community. Yeah. And so that's why you see, and when Lombe started her career in sports for development around, for example, how do we use football and the activity and the excitement around a football tournament to also encourage community members to be active in HIV prevention and keeping themselves and others safe. All right, Janet, if I can ask you, if we've got Lombe setting herself up on the phone, or Lombe, has that been able to work?
So not yet. We're still working on it. There is no dedicated phone line for Zoom in Zambia. The closest I've been able to find is South Africa. Lombe, if you want to unmute and share any updates from your side, that would be great.
Yes, that would be great. Thank you so much. And thank you, Heather. I agree entirely. Do we want to move to...
I've got your Sport Plus slide up.
Do you want to move to slide? Yeah, just to slide 22, because I thought it would be useful to get some examples going.
Okay.
Of some of the actions that are happening across Africa.
On the front of slides 22, because I've got my screen completely full. Here, we got moving the goalposts, Kick for Life. How's that?
I think it's, yeah, sorry about that. So what I wanted to share about sport in action. There's our quiz. Now everybody's going to be ready for it. That was just to get everybody thinking about how many countries they could name in Africa. But that could be your homework and to sort of try out at home. So sport in action, if everybody could hear me clearly while the Zoom holds, Sport in Action is one of the oldest organizations here in Zambia. And it was established around the late 80s. And it started as an organization mainly to engage young people who are playing football in their communities. And this was around the time of the peak of the HIV/AIDS crisis. So this was about creating an environment for young people to still have some semblance of normality of life and of living through a situation which was a crisis, just like we are having now with the COVID. So some of the work that's Sport in Action does and has done over for communities for general day-to-day practice of sport and for communities to be physically active. And this is for both children, adults, as well as persons with disabilities. So the work that they have been doing is to have whole working or only being productive. It must also be fulfilled, and that children and adults and everyone has to experience it. And so this has been part of what we would consider sport for development, because this intervention is not about creating Olympians. It's not about creating elite athletes. It's about providing facilities and supporting and mobilizing communities to have a service as part of holistic well-being, whereas
Oh, the perils of reporting from a place 6,000 kilometers away. Lombe? All
At
right,
a time when there's a focus in terms of crisis, concerns about psychosocial counseling, which are all very valid.
So the only dedicated phone lines for Zoom in Africa that are posted on the website are South Africa, which of course is not where Lombe is joining us from. If any of our audience, I know we have people joining us from Africa, if any of you all know differently because of your day-to-day life, we certainly accept referrals, but we're winging it here to see what's possible to bring our guests to you.
well, I think it's back to PowerPoint karaoke here, where good the, oh, okay.
Oh my goodness.
Okay, well, thank you. Lovely. You've got your social capital value of sport.
Yes. So some of sort of and this is for those who are really interested in looking into the background of some of the sort of theoretical ideas explain. But one thing I wanted to address here is, even though there's been this interaction across different scholars from universities around the world, and actually sports for development organizations in Zambia are among the most sort of group of organizations who feature in several studies across academic literature. I think there's been that openness where researchers can come over and they sort of inquire into what is going on here, and it gets published. So I would like to draw us back to some of the thinking behind some of the work that has been done in these sports organizations that have developed locally here in Zambia, such as Sport in Action, Age Sport Foundation, or the National Organization for Women in Sport. And most of the
Yeah, the EduSport Foundation is quite famous, also far outside Zambia, for the great work that they're doing around coming out of the HIV/AIDS crisis, but then moving beyond that to a wider understanding of health and of self-confidence, self-esteem, and growing a belief in yourself and protecting your health, moving also into areas towards those of us who are interested in sexual and reproductive health, having young women be in control of their fertility, protecting themselves and being ready then to have an excellent family life, but after perhaps having the opportunity to complete their education. We see some here, demonstrating using martial arts, one of my favorite tools around sports for development. Martial arts and other sort of also individual sports alongside all the different team sports which are offered. Going forward in the examples, there's also her organization where working earlier as a volunteer and then now, being the head of the organization, the National Organization for Women in Sport and Physical Activity and Recreation, represents the interests of different organizations in the sports sector, and is very active in advocacy and policy development. I didn't mention in my introduction of Dr. Lombe, but she's also very committed to safeguarding children in sport and was chosen to be on the working group convened by UNICEF of organizations working to make sure that children and women and, well, basically everybody is protected in the sports organizations that they're working. That includes training for volunteers, training for sports boards, and again, the whole sector about how do we make sure that we create a safe environment for children who are who are protected. And then also older people, young women in sport. Those of us knowing more about the American context with US gymnastics knows there's often a lot of predation, unfortunately, on female athletes. And so the need to create a great environment so that everyone can benefit, both boys and girls, men and women, and everybody else. And then the importance of sports and public space, right? Having the opportunity for women and girls to use public resources, whether they be sports fields or gyms and the like. And now SPAR advocates for all of this. And as I said, importantly, Lombe is not just a leader in Zambia, but also in the Southern African region, having also served on the board of the Sports for Social Change Network in South Africa. So again, I'm going to keep doing my karaoke here until we have Lombe back. There
Thank you.
Wonderful, Lombe.
Thank you, Heather. I don't know if everybody can hear me now, but we've got this tag going on. I think having, mentioned and highlighted all these positive actions and contributions, I think it's useful to have a vision of what has proved to be some sticky elements, so some challenging aspects of it. And that is, firstly, as with any approach, it's really about the context in which it is engaged. So when we think about development, from what is it that gets in life, social issues, is it cultural issues, is it legislative barriers that get in the way? And then we can begin to think whether sport interventions and organizations would provide the space and the tools to contribute to those forms of freedom. And just before I went, I was kicked off the technology. We were beginning to talk about freedom from oppressive societies. So this is as far back as the 1930s, 1940s, and African groups mobilizing for freedom from colonial oppression, to have political freedom, to have the right to be independent states. And sport plays a role there. We see how sport is used to organize, to raise awareness, to build leadership, to reinforce messaging, and to convene the actors who would then be associating, and whatever format that
Lombe, I think we're going to try and call you on WhatsApp. So we've got a great group think happening in the background because people want to hear from you and not me doing karaoke. But Janet, maybe if you can try calling Lombe's number, we're going to try the number that I spoke to you with yesterday, Lombe. And maybe we can connect you in that way because that would be great, because unfortunately it is breaking up a little bit. But that you can come back and explain again how sport is one of the few sort of organizations where young women in Zambia, so we'll come back and talk about colonization, but I'd like you to address that, but about getting a multi sectoral, a transdisciplinary, and also an international perspective on the work. To have the opportunity to young women to feel themselves part of a wider, both African and then also international community, because as a sports person, you're often involved, unfortunately, a little bit out of the militaristic, history of sports, but it is often something connected a bit to nation, and that we can question that in Sports for Development, but also use the international aspect of it to give young people a wider understanding of the communities that they're part of. Going forward here, limitations of Sports for Development. There are, of course, many different ones. Part of it maybe being the expectations of others of Sports for Development. As we said, that Lombe, took the time to develop her skills and to write a dissertation in order to qualify. and to be feeling like, again, being able to work with policymakers who sometimes look at sports for development as just sort of leisure activities. Lombe, just let me know in the chat when you're ready. So, and then again, understanding how change happens, all of us connected with the Brown School know how important it is to have a so-called theory of change and to be able to be explicit about how different actions lead to different results. Lombe, do you want to try again? Okay, please.
Yeah, it's could you hear me now?
Yes. 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 But then again, no. Okay, so maybe.
So I think some of them find if sport has historical 30 seconds. Could you hear me now?
So I am trying to establish a WhatsApp connection through my cell phone and put it through speaker. I don't know how to make a connection outgoing from the webinar. If Lombe could call in, we could empower her. And I don't know what the cell quality would be if we had a US-based cell phone on speakerphone next to my webinar microphone, but we're trying things and we do appreciate everybody's patience as we try to improve. So give us just a second.
And of course, the beautifulness of us having our technical call yesterday.
Is this any better? I've just tried to go outside and see whether that improves anything at all.
That sounds good. Just keep talking, Lombe.
All right. So some of what we would want to consider is, if we're saying part of development is freedom from oppression, and we've had the experience or example that anti-colonial movements have used sport to mobilize, that is to develop the groups, to develop the leadership of persons who are campaigning against oppressive systems, as well as to raise awareness and to build a nationalist sort of sensibility that therefore enables solidarity and collective action. We've seen it in African countries in the 30s, 40s, 50s, leading up to 60s, and anti-apartheid movements in the 80s up to 90s, and currently in many parts of the world. Is this something that can be done now? And how come we are hearing less of that in terms of solidarity with more political and forceful interventions? So we are seeing more understanding of development as addressing issues like health, education, but not some of those political questions. Mm-hmm. And so that's why when we even have movements, for example, like Black Lives Matter, or you have movements that speak to freedom from racialized violence or freedom from sexual abuse, there seems to be, I think, some disconnections and not such a strong solidarity across the sports space, as that is not considered as sport for development. That is simply perhaps phrased as activism or advocacy. So the sort of tension I would like to draw attention to is this separation of framing sport for development as these sort of measurable, can fit within the sustainable development goals type of actions, versus some of the sort of social, economic, political changes that can still be achieved using the power of sport. And some work, I think, is beginning to come up, and different groups taking action or taking note. We know that lots of women's organizations, the International Working Group on Women and Sport, the Women's Sport International, Women's Sport Africa Network, although they do not frame themselves as sport for development organizations, they're more aligned with women's movements and women's sports movements. If the work they're doing is to work towards removing oppressive systems so that women and girls can be free, and even boys and men can be free to practice sport and other aspects of their lives, would that not somehow fall within the remit of what we would frame as sport for development? And the implications there are that we would then have to start paying attention to who it is we are in partnership with when we also work together and collaborate. Secondly, as universities or scholars, we would also have to focus our attention to that type of institution who are doing this sort of activist work as we think through what sport for development looks like. And the other question that I would like us to perhaps raise is around what does then the finished work look like? At what point do we sit back and say, yes, development has been achieved, and therefore we can move on to other things, or we can just move on to just doing sport simply? Because sport for development has a reason, because there's a need for development. Otherwise, everyone would just be having fun or getting ready to compete for elite performance. So when can we get back to that, just the simple joy of sport, or as the Olympic movement call to us all the time, stronger, higher, faster, I think, that pursuit of constant improvement. But because there's still the development needs are still there, sport still has to be utilized for those purposes. And we then now have to think internally within the sports for development movements and organizations, what now are we considering part of our core business? Is it just making sure children are in school, the children who are in our sports programs? Or are we now looking into going a step further and making sure we are undertaking advocacy to make sure governments are delivering on their mandates to provide resources so that there are schools in the first place for children to go to? Otherwise, what has happened is the sports for development movement in many cases is we are working to become sort of a replacement of government services. We're becoming bigger in terms of the types of organizations we are. We're building schools. We are building all sorts of service provision that we're delivering. This is helpful. This is serving a need. However, it is, I think, taking on what I think would count as part of a neoliberal way of thinking, that it should be individualized. Everybody should pursue their own well-being and sort things out for themselves, and not have any expectation on what the government can do. And yet, governments and states are delegated by the people to receive those resources and distribute them for the well-being of everyone. So in what ways has sports for development become, has become complicit in silently taking on the work, and therefore not creating the sort of social political change that I think should happen? Because after all, sport for development comes from that background or foundation of being about creating social change. It's sport for anti-colonial action, sports for anti-apartheid action. It's sport to lobby for access to drugs related to HIV/AIDS or anti-discrimination and stigma. It's always been about change. But over the years, we have become quite bureaucratized. We've learned how to have our log frames, have our sort of big organizations and hierarchies. And I say this as somebody who is executive director at a very strongly bureaucratized organization. And it's one of the things we're proud of, that over the last 20 years, we've developed this institutional capacity to be a solid organization that can be recognized as a non-governmental organization. So and I think it's some scholars in South Africa and women's activists, I think Eva Joyce Wynn, I think is her name, and she speaks about the NGOization of movements, of groups who start out seeking change, but then they become solid NGOs, and that is almost seen as a success and an end in itself. So sport for development, I think, is a classic example of some of these things. So in what ways can we, I think, step back and consider where we're going? And Heather, I would like to pause here so that we can have a bit of engagement with our colleagues while our connectivity is still solid.
Yes, well, now your audio is awesome. So we know the solution is get away from the desk and walk outside to be able to continue the conversation. Well, I would like you to say more about this question of fighting the sort of NGOization, or fighting the bureaucracy, and fighting the move to have sports for development move away from its more critical approach into a sort of service provider. There's obviously a lot of people who see the potential in sports for development, but maybe not the disruptive potential. So can you say something about the sort of more disruptive or uncomfortable changes that you'd like to lead from NowSpar, about some of the ways that you think that we can be more building a movement rather than sort of fulfilling wishes from international organizations that want to have cute kids playing soccer?
I make no claim to to having it figured out, because one of the, and this is what I said about there being some contradictions, because one of the things that we sort of say to promote our work and to justify and show off that we are doing good work. I remember just being in a meeting a few weeks ago with the newly installed Minister of Sport. And part of what I was saying was, look, as sports for development organizations, we have built these organizations which employ hundreds of staff amongst us, creating jobs and providing regular services in schools where physical education is not happening, meeting a very real need, meeting a very real gap that is necessary in our country. So to now also say that, on the other hand, I am also very strongly saying we must bring an end to that. We must get to a stage where we don't need to exist for that. We need to exist for the purpose of individuals and communities and groups mobilizing as part of just their own civic engagement and participation in their society, not as the frontline providers of services. So what we will need to get to that is developing our influence to such an extent that we will get listened to by policymakers, that we will get listened to by policymakers in government, policymakers in traditional leadership. And over here in Zambia, we've got traditional leaders. These would be chiefs or other traditional forms of leadership. I know in other parts of the world, you have similar layers of governance as well as in all areas where resources are decided and distributed, to make sure that sports and physical activity becomes integrated across sectors, in the health budget, in the education budget, in budgets to do with infrastructure and how you develop cities and towns and residences, no matter where they are, that is integrated. If that is provided, we will not need to then get up and have a GoFundMe to raise money to put up a basketball hoop in one of the townships, because that is just normal part of design of our living spaces. And if we can move away from the idea that sport and recreation are extras, are what you have when you've got everything else, that is not an important part of your life, that you will only have that after you have done it. And that is what has contributed. And we see it every day, even in parenting. No, don't go out and play sport, focus on studying. But you live in a body, your mind is in a body, your studying brain is in a body. Shouldn't that body experience being physically active? And again, the science tells us, not only the science, our general knowledge, our ancestral knowledge, our day-to-day knowledge, our own bodies ache and complain when we don't move around. So our bodies are designed to move, and that is ingrained in us, but that has not translated into policies. So we need to get this at the policy level where it becomes such common sense that we don't need to even push for it. That is what is going to put us out of business as sports for development organizations. Because this idea of having sport for development organization it's an intervention out of desperation. We have to do whatever we can with whatever we have. And I don't think, as we are beginning to sit back and imagine what sorts of futures we want, that's not part of what we should be imagining. I think I might not have it all together of how that happens, but I think those are some directions to explore.
Thank you. And again, how we are seeing ourselves as in control of the priorities that we're setting and not just becoming service delivery and thinking about a much more ambitious idea about what our societies can look like. Adam Brock has a question for you. Another big part of Sports for Development is Sports for Development and Peace. And he asks about how Sports for Development facilitates intergroup conflict resolution and community building, serving as a purpose for peace. Can you say something about how you see Sports for Development contributing to peace and reducing conflict, Lombe?
There are many aspects of peace and conflict. And I think in many cases, what jumps out is when we consider conflicts perhaps that is armed, or conflicts where there's very apparent violence and perhaps use of force. A layer of conflict or violence that goes and like not associated with conflict resolution is even the conflict that emerges as we advocate and as we try and make progress with changing how society treats women and girls, how society treats people with disabilities. The moment we say, let's redistribute resources and make sure girls and women also have equitable access to school, to opportunities for leadership, to opportunities for being visible. And suddenly you have an increase in, for example, in the last elections in Zambia, there was a really huge increase in women experiencing abuse online in the digital spaces. Because during the COVID, most communications and campaigning had to happen online a lot. And so you could see the violence there happening against them, which then limits their continuation in pursuit of leadership. So there is a form of violence, a form of conflict that is kind of distributed and hard to pinpoint, because who are the two parties that you're bringing together to resolve the conflict or to resolve and create peace? And there is where I think it becomes a bit hard to point to how sport for development can lay claim to creating change there. Where it's more obvious is in situations where, for example, in South Sudan, as well as in Ethiopia and Eritrea, there are groups there that are sports groups that have worked together to create opportunities for dialogue amongst leaders in those areas, to create understanding about the need to share resources, whether it's resources of access to water for animals, or access to time to use certain spaces in the city if they cannot meet together. So it's really about, again, establishing those relationships. And so we extrapolate and say, when we work on building relationships, we facilitate communication, we develop leadership and an environment in which we can be, open to each other and inclusive. That contributes then to the likelihood that there will be less conflict. So I would like to make this reminder again about how sport for development over the years, we have moved towards making very large claims as to being able to fix everything in the universe. The only thing I haven't come across yet is anybody making a claim about sport for development for changing the trajectory of the Earth's orbit. But trust me, if we gather those 17 sustainable development goals, there are sports-related activities happening around each one of them. And it's possible to do that, but we have to be quite honest and clear and open to what extent sport then contributes. How then do you design a program that you can actually achieve that outcome? You could be achieving awareness, you could be achieving communication, but I think we have been less than modest in claims around what it is that we're able to achieve. But that is to say two things. It's either perhaps we are quite ambitious and we do see the potential and we could work on the possibility of or mechanisms to make it work. and therefore that's where the potential and opportunities lie. Or we could become a bit more critical of ourselves and say, well, perhaps this is where our limit is, and our energies should now go in this direction where it actually works. But these are issues that we have to elaborate on, I think, internally as a sports for development organizations and across movements, as well as in the development sector, because this is an entire industry again, with a supply and demand. So I pause there in case there's an additional question before I speak on anything else.
Well, I think we're going to be about to wrap up. I just shared some links about green sport and sports for climate change. I also wanted to Lombe, as you think of sort of a concluding statement, but also recognize that Dr. Anita White, the mother of the Brighton Declaration for Women in Sport, as well as one of the first leaders of the International Working Group for Women in Sport, has joined the call. So thank you very much, Anita, for everything that you've done for all of us, that we can come after you and make the case about how sport is a wonderful tool for gender equality and advancing quality of life for everybody. But Lombe, if you'd like to kind of have a concluding statement, and then we're going to wrap up for today.
Hi, Anita. Good to see you. And so I am going to say that, I don't know if she can see me at all because it might be quite dark, 7 p.m. here. So what I would say in closing is sport for development emerges as an approach because it's necessary. There are development needs. We get back to that understanding that development is about freedom, and that it's about expanding what the real freedoms that people enjoy are. And as long as there are constrictions, whether these are racial constrictions, economic constrictions, or climate-related constrictions, then there is a demand for sport to be leveraged to contribute to these outcomes. And secondly, to say that because sport is about convening and about people being together, building solidarity is a primary approach in sorting out many issues which are transnational, which are multi-generational, and also across many geographies. And those, I would want to leave us with those two words, which are around freedom, around solidarity. And these are the two things that in Zambia and in Africa, we say are encapsulated in the concept of Ubuntu. The idea that my being is located in other people's being, that I am because we are. So my freedom is contingent upon solidarity, contingent upon other people's freedoms. And that, I think, is a strong component that we can drive through sport for development as a movement. Thank you, Heather.
Well, thank all of you for joining us today. Sorry for the crazy technical problems, but you got to see a little bit of PowerPoint karaoke. We appreciate you taking part in Open Classroom and look forward to seeing you at other events or taking the opportunity through some of the links to participate in sports for the development of sports for development. And development is freedom. So how can we work together to create a better world for all? Thank you, Lombe. Thank you, Janet. Back to you.
Thanks, Heather. Thanks, Lombe. I feel like we've run a marathon together, but it ended beautifully. And thank you to the audience for hanging in. Again, hope to see everyone again at another program soon. Please stay healthy and safe out there, everybody. Goodbye now.